Thanks, Gary. Gary will be back up later to talk to us about some other programs. Next up, and again, we're going to try to maintain schedule as best we can. We've got a little buffer so we can get there by noon. We should be all right. Next up, from the American Motorcyclists, easy for me to say. From the American Motorcyclists Association, our good friend Emery Zotter. Typically, we give him about 15 or 20 minutes in front of this group in the general session to talk about everything that's going on nationwide. And even if he tries to talk as fast as I am, he can't get it all in that amount of time. We've heard y'all asking for things over the last few years. You want breakouts? We've got some breakouts this year. And Emery is conducting 2 breakouts this afternoon. So what he's going to do right now is come up and give you about a 10-minute teaser, sort of a dashboard, if you will, of what to expect there. And without further ado, from the AMA, Emery Zotter.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm just following Jay's footsteps. It's hard act to follow. Thank you to ABATE of Indiana and Jay for the invitation to come back this year. As Jay said, I'm just going to provide a teaser this morning to try to get you interested in some of the issues. Jay set the stage very well. This is about the future of motorcycling, and I hope when you leave today, you've come away with enough items of interest that you're going to want to follow up on some of the things we talk about today, not only myself, but many of the other folks. Before I start, I just want to take 30 seconds to acknowledge a special friend that rode over with me today. Many of you folks know Gary Sellers from Ohio. I had the pleasure of riding with Gary. Gary, could you stand up, please? Thank you. Folks like Gary and people who have been in the rights movement for a long time are a very good mentor, and I think you should use these folks to your advantage to learn the history of motorcyclist rights, particularly if you're new to organizations like ABATE of Indiana. So thank you for your consideration, Gary. Let me jump right in quickly. I have about a few slides to just whet your appetite. What Jay said is that motorcycling is about, what we're about is the future of motorcycling, both at the national level with American Motorcyclists Association, the Motorcycle Riders Foundation, and all the SMROs, the State Motorcyclist Rights Organizations. Let me just touch on some of the key issues and hopefully start the conversations, particularly in the hallway, and as Jay said, with the breakout session this afternoon, in the 40 minutes that I've been allotted, we'll try to get into some more depth here. At the international level, the United Nations is a big player, somebody we need to watch, somebody that's very far away, but the issue of global harmonization is going to be key into what we're riding in the future. And if you don't believe that to be the case, ask some of the folks who've had some exposure to what's going on, particularly in Europe. And if you've attended conferences like the MRF Meeting of the Minds, you'll hear some of the folks coming from Europe and Canada talking about the future of motorcycling. And we need to be very careful to understand what's coming from those communities to ours. Road safety initiatives, big in Europe, particularly Sweden's Vision Zero. If you want to read a scary proposition, read the proposition about 0 highway deaths and injuries. And in Sweden, when this was put together, motorcyclists were not part of the equation. And so the very scary scenario is the way to prevent motorcycle injuries and deaths is to prevent motorcyclists from riding on the roads. Climate change, I don't care whether you're for or against it, if you believe it's true, if you don't believe, climate change is going to drive a lot of what's going on, particularly when we're talking about the reformulation of fuels and also emissions. Emissions is key for us, for many of us who choose to modify our motorcycle. They may not be able to get us on the noise issue, but they will get us on the emissions issue. So be very careful with that. Global economy, I don't have to say much about that, but when you see a major U.S. manufacturer make some of the recent decisions that they had because of the global economy, it's not just about what's happening in the U.S., it's what's happening globally that we need to be concerned as a community. Are we going to be able to buy the kinds of vehicles we want to ride in the future? There's some very exciting things coming down the pike. There's also some very scary things coming down the pike. At the federal level, many of you have heard the distracted driving issue is become a big thing. In Washington right now, there was a summit that took place last month, at which time they announced there's legislation at the federal level that would mandate every state pass a ban on texting while driving or risk losing 25% of their highway funds. That's called blackmail. This is the kind of stuff that's coming because this is a hot button issue. The crash causation study, many of you who have been in this for a while know that the last formal study we had was released in 1981, the Hertz study. Many of us have been trying for many years to get a new study, an updated study, to say, why are motorcyclists crashing? It sounds like a no-brainer, but there are a lot of things that go into this. Right now, the pilot study has been completed, but there is a funding issue, and there is also an issue about the number of crashes that are going to be included in the study. So stand by, this issue is not resolved. For those folks in Indiana who are off-highway motorcyclists and ATV enthusiasts, you need to be very wary of what's going on with wilderness designations. This is where folks in the East determine what's best for folks in the West and are looking to set aside over 35 million acres that would be closed to motorized recreation. Closed forever. This is something, again, you have a wonderful opportunity here in Indiana for off-highway motorcycling. But if your children and grandchildren want to ride, you need to be concerned about unnecessary wilderness designations in areas that are not appropriate. CPSIA, how many know what this acronym is all about? If you have children... BS. BS, yes. This is about lead content in youth motorcycles and ATVs. And the law that was passed last August said motorcycles for children 12 and under cannot be sold if they have a certain percentage of lead in their controls. And I don't know too many parents that let their children sleep with their motorcycles or suck on the clutch handles or the battery terminals. But this is the kind of thinking that's going on that's a threat to all of us. And as Jay said, the future of motorcycling is not us. The future of motorcycling is the youth. If you don't allow children to ride, to learn to ride appropriately, chances are they're not going to come and become street riders. This is a growing issue, the CPSIA. The state level, as Jay said, there's going to be two breakout sessions this afternoon. This chart is not an eye test. It's just to give you an idea of the kinds of things we're going to discuss this afternoon. Some of the categories: tolls, taxes, traffic actuated signals, passenger age restrictions. It may not be going on in your state, but it's going on in a state adjacent to you, and I can tell you legislators talk to each other. So just because you haven't had a passenger age restriction bill in Indiana this session, that's not to say a bill introduced. But I know as long as ABATE of Indiana is at the helm, you're not going to let something like this go through.